Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and conscious uncoupling editor of the American
Oh
Mind. I
no.
am joined, we're off to a rollicking good start today. I'm joined by the dream team, managing editor Mike Sabo and publisher and president Ryan Williams. We will start with the serious stuff because we've got a couple. I mean, everything I guess is serious, but we've got some truly wacky stuff to discuss down the line. First, though, we're recording this on the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas attack against Israel. You will hear it a couple days after, and perhaps you will know more than we do about the peace talks that are going on right now as we speak. It's kind of an interesting moment on this 2-year anniversary, not just to look back on the fallout of that attack and the war and the changing attitudes towards Israel in America and Europe, etc., but also, and perhaps even more urgently, to look at this 20-point peace plan that Trump has put forward, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to, and that as we speak is being negotiated over in Egypt. Hamas and Israeli negotiators have spent many hours and will continue to do so, I guess, discussing whether they can accept all of these points. I'm just going to select a few of them that I find particularly significant, and you guys can bring up others if you like. Number one is Gaza will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. I find that interesting because I want to know precisely what it means. It feels like they probably have to hammer out some points there. Number four is that within 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting this agreement, all hostages, alive and deceased, will be returned. This is something that, as of right now, last I heard, Hamas had agreed to the hostage release, but not to the 72-hour timeline, which is sort of remarkable. Point seven, upon acceptance of this agreement, full aid will immediately be sent into the Gaza Strip, so releasing any of the barricades or blocks to aid that have been part of the war. Number nine, Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. This committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by President Donald J. Trump, with other members and heads of states to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. It goes on, but I did not have on my 2025 bingo card a public official document in which the word technocratic and the name Donald J. Trump appear in the same point. It really does seem like Trump is angling for the Nobel Peace Prize here. And I think that's kind of a serious thing for him. We can get into that more. But just one more I'll read, and that is that Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. As the ISF establishes control and stability, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, ISF, the guarantors, and the United States, with the objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to Israel, Egypt, or its citizens. So, lots obviously to discuss, and you guys can take this in whatever direction really you want, but I'm curious, just first and foremost, what you think this peace plan signals, and perhaps how likely you think it is to carry water and succeed.
Yeah. Well, I think we seem to be closer than we have ever been. Right. Negotiations went on yesterday, late into the night, and they're continuing today. Although Egypt is 9-10 hours ahead of us, so probably late into the evening now, or early evening. Well, no, late in the evening. So we'll see. I was struck by the old wisdom of our dearly departed senior fellow Angelo Codovilla, and he's on my mind because we had a book event last week in Beverly Hills for this short volume I put together, remembering Angelo and talking about his legacy and what it means for us today. So Angelo, just a little background as lead up he was quite critical of both Afghanistan and Iraq, although for the same reason, with circumstances differing in each place. He always thought that, yes, of course, strike the Taliban. They were the regime in question, sort of, who harbored Al Qaeda, and they should be punished for it. But he thought the obsession with Al Qaeda as such was misplaced obsession because it didn't properly account for the real facilitator of a group like Al Qaeda, which is it's a transnational terrorist organization, but ultimately there are regimes behind it with financial resources and all the trappings and advantages of having a proper regime. So he thought the obsession with Al Qaeda as such in the mountains of Kandahar and elsewhere was stupid and was the wrong focus. He also thought, of course, that building democracy in a tribal land and especially a centralized state, which, of course, Afghanistan had no experience with, was folly at the atmospheric or stratospheric levels of folly. And then, Iraq, Angelo actually wasn't opposed to Iraq. My joke about Angelo is that he was kind of against Afghanistan and for Iraq. But he liked the Iraq invasion because it was taking out an actual regime that, as he put it at one point, was the standing avatar for anti-Americanism in the region, and one that had cultivated a lot of respect around the region for standing up to America, even though they lost in the first Gulf War. The regime survived, and Saddam did all sorts of things with relative impunity, no fly zone to the contrary notwithstanding. But he also thought that the democracy project in Iraq was also folly. So anyway, this is all lead up to say, I think this, to the extent that we're closer than we ever have been to a peace deal, it's because the Trump administration and the Israelis have focused everyone on the real source of Hamas's survival, which is the regimes behind it. Jonathan Chanzer was on the Commentary podcast, and Chanzer's good to check in with because he knows the region well and speaks to a lot of inside sources in the region. And his point was that he didn't actually talk about the Iran strike from the United States, but I would lump it in together. So Trump has shown a seriousness about the regime question without embarking on a regime change war, that is the Operation Midnight Hammer strikes, that I think sobered Iran about the prospects for their continued backing of Hamas without consequence. And then also Chanzer's point was, when Israel started striking Hamas in Qatar, that was a wake-up call to the Gulf states, to the Emirates, to the Qataris, to all the Gulf states, to Kuwait. And they all sort of went, oh, okay, that means we could get missiled in our apartments without warning. This maybe has gone far enough, and we might want to find ourselves an exit for the continued facilitation of Hamas's war against, or insurgency, I guess, insurgency war against Israel. And so this, in different ways, the seriousness about the regime question and the willingness to use force, which demonstrated a seriousness in a way that American foreign policy had not in its fumbling way of managing endless regime change wars. It was a nice turn, or a turn that signaled, I suppose, to the players in the region, without which Hamas cannot really survive, that something new had to be tried, and perhaps that's what has brought everyone to the table. My one high note of skepticism on this whole plan is the notion that Hamas would disarm completely. That will be tough, I think, especially without some sort of occupation by somebody, an international technocratic group that's not Hamas. If the past adventures of the UN, et cetera, are any indication, does not bode well for the enforcement of a disarming of Hamas. So we'll see about that.
Yeah, nobody's ever thought about an international consortium of technocrats to bring peace to the Middle East. It's a totally novel idea.
They've written a new, strongly worded bureaucratic letter, technocratic letter.
Right.
Please put down your weapons. Yeah.
It's like they're almost learning from congressional Republicans, I mean, all you need, I guess, is a strongly worded letter, and, we'll see. And actually, it's funny, sometimes at that, I mean, I think even our side sometimes is like, oh, that's all they're doing. Well, I think there's actually more to it. Domestically, I think that they're doing, you look at Kash Patel and the FBI, and I also think, too, internationally, I mean, clearly, Trump is leading something that, Keir Starmer, the British prime minister, basically talked about and was pretty positive about that the U.S. is leading this coalition. Trump has obviously spoken about, I think somebody in the press mentioned, what about a Nobel Peace Prize? Well, certainly that's on his mind, but I think this is it could be just a larger effort to extricate the U.S. from some of these really kind of more regional fights. Maybe it's kind of a beginning of a positioning towards showing our power in that region, showing what we can do, that there is a space basically between this kind of neoconservative intervention and, and the critics always use this term, and I hate using this term, it's just this kind of like isolation, Fortress America stuff, which Trump has never stood for ever since 2015 onward. Like that whole idea is just absolutely bogus. But I think this is maybe just precursors to a shift to China, to Asia, kind of that pivot. We'll see what happens. Like you said, Ryan, I also do have tons of skepticism about that Hamas is somehow going to stop launching rockets. I guess that rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel on the anniversary. So, which is today, that, some could interpret obviously as a rejection of the plan in action. And it's interesting too, just to see kind of what, the parties, I guess, are talking about. Trump has used the terms really good. I mean, he seems to be very positive. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he's emphasizing the plan's potential for lasting peace on the anniversary, obviously today as we record. Vice President J.D. Vance, he said the same thing too. Prime Minister Netanyahu, he supports the plan, obviously, but, he does say, hey, forces are going to remain until Gaza, until security is assured. Hamas is reviewing the plan. I think there's some kind of shuttle diplomacy, basically, where, they're not meeting directly. So the U.S. actually sent Steve Witkoff, obviously, the U.S. Special Envoy, and Jared Kushner. So they're going to be in Egypt. But, we'll see what happens. I mean, this is the first time I think I've seen a lot of heads of state, a lot of interested parties really come to the table, and that talks have actually advanced to this point. We actually have a 20-point plan. So we'll see what happens. I mean, Hamas obviously is Hamas, and, based on their past actions, I think it would be absolute folly to say this is a slam dunk, but I think it certainly is moving toward in a positive direction.
Yeah, Hamas gonna Hamas is a pretty good rule to live
Mm-hmm.
by. It's funny, like, about the Nobel Prize thing. Something I genuinely kind of admire about Donald Trump is that he does sincerely want to be loved, and he wants to be loved for kind of fixing things. It's a big theme with him, and and he wants to be loved by the kind of cosmopolitan establishment,
Oh, there's no doubt.
right, among whom he was once a darling. There were many years when Trump was kind of a beloved goofball figure in that world. And so it does, I think, actually hurt him when those people call him a monster. And yet, at the same time, he's willing to disregard their opprobrium and push forward and do what he thinks needs to be done. And I think that's almost more touching than if he just genuinely didn't care. I mean, I think the three of us on this podcast would probably love to be attacked by CNN. And I don't think Trump really does love that. So it's kind of like he would like the Nobel Peace Prize, but what he really wants is to do the things that would be worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize. And I think he wants that sincerely. I also think it's a really interesting point about Israel, Ryan, that they have kind of prosecuted this war in a way that recognizes the cat and the cat's paws, right? That can tell the difference between those two things. And really, from what I can see, it looks like they think Iran is the major threat in the region. And then when Netanyahu talks about this, he talks about dismantling the Iranian access. So these other kind of subsidiary groups like Hezbollah, for instance, that they've been really targeting. And I wonder whether, like you guys, my biggest worry about this is, well, are you really? I mean, Bibi Netanyahu has talked at times throughout this war as if he wanted Gaza just not to be a thing. Like he just wanted to kind of obliterate the whole region or occupy it or whatever. And he's obviously not getting that out of this deal. And so will the threats still remain in the region. Maybe so. Maybe though they'll be so hamstrung and kind of weakened that it won't matter as much. And also just to finish these various comments, like there is the element of this which has to do with Western support for or lack of support for Israel. And we've talked a lot about the varying ways in which that's fraying. Some of it on the left and the right is a kind of conspiratorial anti-Semitism, which I think has definitely appeared as a major force and takes different kind of flavors on the left and right, but it's definitely there. Some of it, though, is really that the support in the center is being eaten away at. It's not, it's an ugly war, and it's been kind of difficult for Israel's centrist supporters to maintain like full-throated support. And I think that this plan kind of looks to me like an effort to regain that center, like to say this war has had consequences that we actually can all be sort of comfortable with, that now Iran is severely weakened and its proxy groups have been all but destroyed. And however, Gaza is not being occupied or razed to the ground. So I don't know. It looks like a prudent plan to me, but I'm also an idiot and don't know that much about international
Yeah,
relations. So.
it also, if there is some sort of stability and deal, it could very well mean the end of Netanyahu's political career as well, because the reckoning has been postponed during the war. But I mean, this was Netanyahu and his cabinet's fault in many ways. They were paying off Hamas for years, and they made the miscalculation and got lazy and complacent that this would mean a kind of status quo, non-war, but a manageable problem in Gaza. And of course, that was not the case.
That was Dane Geld. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, just from, just sheer numbers, I mean, when people look at, 67,000, I think Gazans have been killed, 18,000 children, like, no matter what side
According to the Gazan Health Network.
according, yeah. I mean, all these numbers are, highly, but still, when they see basically a proportion on one side or, a huge number on one side, not so much on the other, I mean, that's just going to raise people's ire. And I think, like you said, Ryan, I mean, this might be, this is looking like probably the end of Netanyahu's probably political career. We'll see. But it's just, I mean, there's so many optics, I think, too, that have hurt Israel. There are, certainly people. I mean, if you look at, Gen Z, and we're going to be talking about them later, I mean, you look at their opinions on Israel, and I mean, it's heavily tilting away from Israel. So, Israel has to deal with all that, the perception, the realities, all those things.
Yeah, it's been a PR nightmare for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And again, a lot of that could be laid at the feet of an insufficient attention by the Israeli government to how people consume media and what they're watching.
Mm-hmm.
Newly in evidence is this alleged $5 million contract with Brad Parscale, MAGA grifter from the first Trump campaign and 2020. I forget his involvement in 2020.
He was in 2020 for like a bit, and then had some meltdown on his driveway.
Yeah, and then he got hopped up on Budweiser and got arrested in his driveway.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so they're spending, a decent chunk of change, not a huge one, on and investing. It seems to me close to closing or close to curtain call here, maybe. So maybe too late, probably too little, too late on more social media, especially TikTok stuff, which is where the battleground is for the hearts and minds of Gen Z.
Yeah, that's I mean, there are many things that have emerged from this war and the Ukraine war which strike me as teachable moments for the future of warfare generally. Part of it is the kind of targeted technological drone warfare, but the other thing is, as Alex Jones might say, info wars. And there have been very, very sophisticated campaigns, many of them, in my view, quite dishonest, disingenuous, but also in some ways quite effective against Israel, to paint it as a monster that Israel's had to learn how to respond to that.
Yeah, any
Yeah.
foreign intelligence agency worth its salt has used this as a wedge to drive into American politics generationally, for sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is something that we will be dealing with. I mean, I think honestly, the actually, I was going to say the Democrats will have a hard time dealing with it, but the right has a problem with it too. So
Mm-hmm.
we will to be continued, I guess. And also, we'll find out what the outcome is probably by the next time we record. So I mean, we'll check back in on the home front. we have got to talk about these text messages from Virginia's Jay Jones. I was going to introduce this segment actually by describing an interview between Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates, two other leftists, and the dilemma that has emerged in the wake of Charlie Kirk over how, if at all, Democrats can dissociate themselves from those among their party who are calling for more political death and bloodshed. And we were going to use that as a jumping off point for a discussion, as we sometimes do, of the state of the left. But I actually think this is ratcheting those questions up so much higher and more intensely that we can just dive right into to Jones and maybe deal with Coates and Klein down the road if we need to. The background here is a story that National Review first broke on Friday. And it's kind of an old event, which is interesting in and of itself. It's these text messages that Jay Jones sent are from 2022, at which point he was a member of Virginia's House of Delegates. He's now the Democratic nominee for Attorney General. But at the time, he was texting about Todd Gilbert, who was a Republican and the Speaker of the House. He was texting with his colleague, Republican House Delegate Kerry Coyner, and he said some things such as, quote, 3 people, 2 bullets, Gilbert, Hitler, and Pol Pot. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Spoiler, put Gilbert in the crew with the 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. So this is a kind of dark date, marry, kill, I guess. It's like if you have 2 bullets, but 3 fascists, whom do you kill? And he says, I'm always going to kill Speaker of the House Gilbert. Coyner, clearly disturbed, tries to sort of talk him down, get him to stop incriminating himself. And what's just, to me, particularly amazing about this, as compared with other unhinged things that Democrats have sometimes been caught out in saying, is that this is not an ill-considered, off the cuff, blowing off steam kind of thing where we've excavated some private exchange in which people spoke too rashly. Those exist, and we kind of all probably have sent a text message or two in ire that we might regret or not want published. This is like if you had scripted a kind of court case to prove that Jay Jones really did mean very specifically what he was saying. You couldn't have done better than these text messages. I mean, Coyner several times gives him an opportunity to kind of walk it back, and he Jones basically says, "No, what I mean is that people need to be afraid of political violence, and I would like to be the one to commit that political violence against not only my opponent but also his wife and children." Coyner says, "You are talking about hoping that Jennifer Gilbert's children would die." Jones replies, "Yes, I have told you this before. Only when people feel pain personally do they move on to policy." These texts are so out of pocket, you guys. I mean, what I find remarkable is that they express a philosophy so clearly. They're really not mouthing off. They're kind of a straightforward assertion of intent, and and there have been moments, when people have said things sort of like this, especially during 2020. I'm thinking of Ayanna Pressley, a member of the Squad, who said things about how people really need to feel the fear and the pain of the riots. There have been other moments like this, but this one is so explicit. And Democrats in Virginia are really caught in a pickle. I mean, they seem to be kind of standing by him publicly, but also in terror that this is going to make a great midterms ad and beyond. Where, I mean, I guess my first question for you is, does this surprise you at all? I know that we kind of talk a lot on this podcast about this problem of extremism on the left, but to me, this really seems it's kind of like staring into the void. But what are your guys' reactions to these text messages?
Yeah, we should also say that it's of course caught up in the Spanberger Winsome Sears gubernatorial race because the AG is more or less part of the ticket, even though they're not, they're running independently. So So far, it does not look like this is going to derail Spanberger's somewhat comfortable lead over Winsome Sears, but maybe. And it may, yeah, it may at the very least, it may cut into Virginia's House of Delegates Democratic majority and affect this gubernatorial race. We'll see. I don't understand how you could be this imprudent, for one thing. I mean, it's not like he was texting one of his Democratic colleagues. He
Yeah.
was texting. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, you maybe you send the first one and then you hear, not literally hear, but you hear the screenshotting going on the other end of from your political opponent or someone on the other side of the aisle. Maybe I don't know their history together. Maybe they're pretty close, but it's shocking to me the level of malpractice, political malpractice that this is. But we should be glad for it because it illustrates in a state that is, of course, at least in its political leadership and elite class, very, very close, if not somewhat synonymous with DC in general, Northern Virginia being an appendage of it and increasingly blue, and thus Virginia being increasingly blue because Northern Virginia is where most of the people live near DC. So we should be glad that this did come out into the light of day because it shows kind of the rotten core at a segment of the Democratic Party in a state that is more a bellwether than most for the DC political class's opinions on the Democratic side. It's pretty troubling, and I should hope. I mean, in a sane country and even a sane state, even to the extent that it's purple or getting bluer, this should have some real costs for Democrats. So it will be interesting to watch whether this all blows over or whether it has some real legs.
Yeah, no, I think the prudential side, I mean, that first kind of got me too. I mean, sending all these texts that looks like a script written by some, Hollywood screenwriter. I mean, it's kind of insane how they go through everything. And he's like, why, yes, they are evil. Why, yes, they are fascists. And yes, I would like to shoot them. I mean, it's so kind of shockingly straightforward. It's kind of stunning. And I guess at least the Virginia Mercury reported, I'm not sure if National Review themselves reported this, but I guess these texts were actually sent first mistakenly to this Republican delegate, Kerry Coyner. And then it just kind of kept escalating from there. And it was like, it's not only text, it's like, he's almost kind of maybe some harassment too involved too. And I guess this same year, so this was 2022 when this happened, Jones was arrested driving 116 miles per hour on Interstate 64. And
This
so
was
he,
going to be my guess. Okay, I was like, I can think of one reason why one might imprudently text a colleague and
yeah.
then double down. If you were drunk.
So I guess, yeah, and this was from the National Review piece. So he got a $15,000 fine, 1,000 hours of community service. I guess 500 of which he spent working for his own political action committee, which
Wait,
is,
was it a was it a DUI in addition to the 116 miles an hour?
it looks like it was just reckless
Okay.
driving. So
Yeah.
it was 46 miles over the speed limit. So nothing else involved in there.
And
So
yeah, in most states, if you're going over 100, you go straight to jail.
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously there's some weird things going on there. But yeah, I mean, this, obviously insanely bad timing with Charlie Kirk, and Republicans are absolutely right to use this and put the Democrats' hold their feet to the fire. Tim Kaine is backing him. I mean, a lot of Democrats, especially in the state and elsewhere, keep backing him. I think they just realize the problem that they've put themselves in by normalizing absolutely dehumanizing rhetoric for years. I mean, Nazi, fascist. It's like, look, if you keep calling your opponent that, somebody's going to connect the logical dots and say, oh, well, what do we do to Nazis and fascists? So, Republicans better keep pushing. And, just this kind of stuff, I mean, just socially should not be acceptable. I mean, the law of fashion has moved so far to the left. I think Republicans, it's not only about politics, keeping these people out of office, but I think it's also about just recentering it toward a nation that actually celebrates character and virtue and Republican mores. So I think that part is really important. That Republicans just keep holding their feet to the fire and keep pushing.
Yeah, the driving ticket says what it says, but there's definitely the whiff, the stench of alcohol around these text messages, or if
Hmm.
not something stronger, which doesn't mean that they're any less grotesque. I mean, they say in vino veritas because you reveal your inner thoughts, not because you then suddenly take on a totally new personality. But it does seem like this guy is completely out of control in one way or another. And yeah, it's extremely salutary. It's good for the health of the republic, I think, for this to come out, for this to be exposed to the light. I mean, when Charlie Kirk was killed, I'm working on a piece about this right now, so it's very much on my mind that there was this effusion of bloodlust, which is the only way to describe it, on Blue Sky, which has kind of become the haven of the libs there are, and sort of around that milieu. And I wrote some post about how grotesque this was, and it kind of started. It did that thing that posts sometimes do, where it shows up on other platforms besides the one that you wrote it on, and it gets back to you via other channels. So, long story short, my Twitter post about Charlie Kirk made it to Facebook with a very different group of people that I know there. And I got this message from a well meaning kind of lefty from, I think, my college days, who said, "Who is gloating? What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. Everyone that I am seeing is expressing their heartfelt condolences." So this is a person that's looking at Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris and sort of these mainstream left wing figures who, though they indulge in all the same irresponsible rhetoric, Mike, that you're alluding to, did have enough political good sense in the moment to say, this is bad and you shouldn't kill your political opponents, even though many of the things we say imply otherwise. All of this I raise just to say there's a significant portion out there still of well meaning liberals who simply, especially older people who aren't terminally online, who simply do not understand that the younger generation has taken them seriously. This is what I think has really happened: is there have been college professors and public figures saying these really outlandish things about Donald Trump's various analogs throughout history. And before Trump, it was Bush and much more moderate Republicans also, that they are akin in all these different ways to fascist dictators throughout the centuries. And as you say, Mike, if that's something you literally believe, if it's not just a kind of patois, a manner of speaking, but an actual truth claim about the person currently holding the highest office in the land, then there are certain logical moral conclusions that you are invited to draw about who this figure is and what your responsibility is. I mean, I think we all believe that if the situation were truly as dire as the farthest left rhetoric implies, ultimately at some point there would be a right of revolution, right? And so this is something that the young people have now taken seriously, but they are describing and expressing that in venues where their elders often don't hear them, don't see that this is going on. And so you have all these nice kind of respectability politics leftists who simply don't understand that they have a massive festering problem with very serious, non ironic, straightforward political violence and the advocacy of it among their own ranks. And this is something that, like, really has to be driven home to people. You really have to get it into the heads of people that are well-meaning, that this stuff is going on. So when somebody like Jay Jones is revealed to be talking this way, I think it does actually really help that. It helps to kind of shock people out of their complacency about what really is a culture of casual bloodlust on the left. I mean, this is a kind of rhetoric that just has been going on for so long. And eventually, it's not the college professors who do the violence, it's their students who take them seriously.
Yeah, I think part of your Kirk essay, Spencer, we've discussed it a bit, is going to be the different media worlds in which people inhabit. And this is a great example of that. Your friend who, if I may ask, how old was that friend who reached out? Oh, so your age, right? Yeah.
No,
So,
no, from my college years, but she is like 60s now.
oh, okay.
Just an
So, yeah,
older person.
old Gen
Yeah.
X or young boomer. Yeah. Old Gen X. Yeah. It's my one data point on this is I have on the ground information from the University of Vermont, which is in the top 3 most liberal campuses. and the widespread reaction to the Charlie Kirk shooting, I think the day of or maybe the day after, amongst that student body, overwhelmingly was to throw parties to celebrate his murder. So, it's remarkable the different media ecosystems we live in, and it's another reason to, at least if you're in our business, which we try to do, to consume them broadly and to check in on all of them, because you will get a pretty warped picture of what America's sentiment is right and left if you don't sample the various bubbles that exist all over the place.
And it reminds me too, kind of post like Russian Revolution, where I mean, the Soviets obviously communists came to power, and the kids were the ones who seemed to be, I mean, the most pro regime, where they were turning on their parents, they were selling their own families, and sending them to the gulags. I mean, so it's not really a surprise. You kind of see that in history, where the young at times can be so much more radicalized, and kind of the half logic that the boomers and Gen Xers kind of bought into, and they didn't follow through with. I mean, we're human beings, we're not always going to be following through on every little single thing we say. They see that and they say, oh well, maybe that was hypocrisy, maybe we're listening to what they've said, and we're doing it. So I think you have the media problem, you have just the young being who they are. I mean, you have all these kind of things compounding just to form an absolutely just toxic mess.
It's totally true, Mike. It's something that actually, in its essence, is quite admirable about youth, that young people expect words to mean things.
Hmm.
And when they hear their elders kind of mouthing off, they naively assume that the things they say are things that they mean and believe in. And again, that's really good. It actually, if you have regular contact with young people, like, I teach college classes, and it keeps you honest if you're paying attention and you're trying to kind of honor that about young people. You try to only say things to them that are true. If you're not doing that, right, then this otherwise good thing about the youth becomes a truly dangerous dimension of political life, that they are hearing irresponsible kind of loose talk and translating it into rigorously exacting reality, and that's something that, like, I think we haven't reckoned with in quite some time. Speaking of the youth, of the young, we should do one last little amuse-bouche to close us out here. Every now and then this year, it has been our pleasure, question mark, to check in on the culture section of the New York Times. There just happens to be a certain knack that NYT writers have for going negatively viral. And the piece that is in the atmosphere right now is by Maggie Lang. It's from September 27th. So actually a little bit ago, somebody just surfaced it on X, and now everybody's talking about, what does Gen Z divorce look like? This piece, I mean, obviously the lead of a piece like this is going to be tailor selected for the most kind of clickable, unbelievable patchwork of identitarian, I don't even know what to say, identity categories. I'm just going to read this, I guess, and then we can discuss. In 2021, Kira Benson, a violinist living in Seattle, knew it was time to get a divorce. Ending their 2-year lavender marriage wasn't an easy decision, but the musician had a supportive ally. If you have to dump your ex-husband, Mix Benson said, co-dump him with his mistress. MX Mix, we are soon to learn, is the gender-neutral version of Mr. or Mrs. Before the breakup, Mix Benson, 27, who uses the pronoun they, checked in with their therapist, who said a divorce would be a good choice out of queer solidarity. This is like the that viral interview from the cast of Wicked come to life. Out of queer solidarity, holding space in the lyrics of Defying Gravity, they informed their husband's mistress. That, first of all, the grammar of this paragraph is so mind bending. It gives me a headache even trying. So a single person, their therapist, out of queer solidarity, they, one person, informed their husband's mistress. This was kosher in Mix Benson's arrangement, which was not a legal marriage, nor indeed a marriage of any kind, it would seem, but a domestic partnership about their shared partner's troubling behavior. The night of the breakup, Mick Spenson and the mistress spent a cozy evening together. We were eating a lot of comfort food, playing a lot of Animal Crossing. First order of business. I was under the impression that traditionally, if that's the word I want to use, a lavender marriage was one in which a gay man or woman married a heterosexual person of the opposite sex, with both parties aware of the situation, either for religious reasons or to keep up appearances. This is something, for instance, that Cole Porter, the famously gay Broadway composer, had a lavender marriage. I read this paragraph about 5 times over, trying to parse what the term lavender marriage means in this context. But the the identities and sexualities are too amorphous for me to understand what the expectation is that's being subverted or knowingly flouted in this marriage. In any case, do you guys think that this is a sort of sensationalist ploy for attention? In other words, is the New York Times cherry picking the rage bait couples that are living these dissipate inchoate lives? Or is this a real reflection of something that's going on kind of among Gen Z, that just marriage has become a kind of meaningless catch-all and it ends as easily as it begins and nobody knows what's going on? But what was your read on this piece?
I was struck by, well, I think the latter, Spencer, is what's going on. I mean, the description of most of these marriages would have looked pretty odd to even just a generation ago, let alone mid-century America. I mean, religion is completely absent from this piece. The part of marriage, the core of marriage, which has been part of Western civilization for millennia, is completely absent from this piece, not even glancingly mentioned or alluded to. And so my question is, I complain about the title because most of these things are not marriages, so I don't think they're really divorces either. It's sort of like
Hmm.
they're just couplings of sorts. So it's kind of dating with the patina of marriage. Also, this one quote stuck out to me from this Michelle, weird spelling, Jancy, who's a content creator living in Oceanside, California, a place I know well, having grown up just south of there. I feel like with social media at our fingertips, we are just so much more aware of all the lives we could be living, Miss Jancy said.
Hmm.
We're scrolling through our feed and we see this girl lives on a sailboat in Maine, and then this girl lives in a high rise in New York. You can just see firsthand what all these different lives look like, and that makes it easier to visualize a change or shift. So it's the grass is always greener phenomenon, which applies, of course, to marriages if you let such brainworms infect you. But then it's multiplied by a million because people have this instant view, which is half fake most of the time, I should add. So it's this funhouse mirror version of the lives you could be living. And then at
Mhm.
some point later in the article, they say, maybe this is just the new norm. You know, the young people think they're going to live longer so that they'll have like 3 scare quote marriages throughout their life in their different eras to put it in Taylor Swiftian language. And
Hmm.
so the like surreality of this new relationship arrangement in Gen Z is striking. I wonder how widespread. I mean, you know, the New York Times goes trolling around a very specific set of Gen Z for this article, which is kind of young laptop class types. They all look somewhat well heeled, but maybe that's unfair. So I wonder how far this phenomenon runs. I suspect it is a general problem in Gen Z, but it might be isolated to the coasts and the big cities. Not that divorce is, not infecting the rest of Flyover America as well.
That was actually kind of my read too, just wondering about the class aspect of it. It does seem like a very targeted, very specific group of people. I mean, you look at violinist, content creator, etc. I mean, just things that speak to a certain kind of person, certain kind of living arrangements, etc. This one part really, and it's actually just really one word that really I think maybe says what's really going on. This line: whether it's young divorce generally or Gen Z divorce specifically in 2025, splits often feel less like scandals and more like rebrands. So I think they're that really gets to the root of what may be happening here, where it's a culture, it's a digital thing. It's a culture where, hey, you can go through marriages as fast as you scroll through TikTok or X or whatever. That it's marriage has become, I mean, going from something that was, God ordained to maybe something that was a contract to now, I mean, it's not even something like that. It's really, I mean, I think, like you said, Ryan, I think this is right. It's really aping something in an institution. I mean, this is like a degrade version of what marriage actually even originally was. They're just kind of miming something and practicing something that it's not even really that anymore. So once you've hollowed it out, it's like, this is what's going to happen. People are going to be using the language, but not even doing that thing anymore, not even close. So yeah, and this kind of goes along hand in hand, I think, with the Emma Watson quote about pressure to get married now is violence against young people. So Emma Watson, obviously, she was Hermione in the Harry Potter series. Her getting her BA at Brown University obviously probably did not help things at all. But it's like, they're using the language of marriage, they're using the vestiges of these things, but divorce is happening, marriage is not really happening anymore. I mean, it's almost like it's weird in some way that these people think like there's a group of independent fundamentalist Baptists that are just on the verge of taking over the world and imposing like iron contracts that cannot be gotten out of and everything. And it's just like, look, like that's just not the world we live in. I mean, that's just silly. Okay, well, what parent is going to be telling, or is basically not going to be telling, hey, delay marriage until you're 30? I mean, this is what happens from parents, the media, the megaphone. That's all what's being said. And then too, especially with kids, delay that even further. So
Mm,
it's we're
yeah.
still living in this vestige of like this world that these people have created that is just not true to reality at all.
Yeah, I was the other notable thing is it's all women that are featured. Well,
Hmm.
allegedly. I mean,
Mhm.
the pronoun stuff is hard to tell, and the lavender marriage that yeah, the first paragraph sort of throw you off as to who is male and female, but it appears to all be women. And at the bottom of this, I think there's evidence that this may be changing because at the bottom of this piece, at least in the app, New York Times app, it says inside the world of Gen Z, and they have a bunch of stuff that they've been writing on this. And the most interesting to me is which we already know, we've talked about one of their bullet points for another piece to read is for the first time in modern American history, young men are now more religious than their female peers. They attend services more often and are more likely to identify as religious. If there's going to be a change in Gen Z and the subsequent generation, it will be driven by that, I think, which is a new and newly upgraded and more marriageable cohort of men that end up changing a lot of the women around them who are seeking to settle down with them. So something to watch.
Yeah, the aforementioned Cole Porter, author of many famous musical theater classics, but one of his best lines is from the musical Anything Goes. When mothers pack and leave poor father because they decide they'd rather be tennis pros, anything goes. And that's 1934. So I raise it just to point out that this situation is downstream of many, many decades of social upheaval in America, right? This is like what's so astute about that line is that, and that whole song is like, these are individual things that are happening, these extreme cases, much like in this article of, indulging in nudist parties in studios and all these things that are happening that the pilgrims would be shocked about. But the implication is that if you can do these things, then you can do anything at all. Anything goes. And I think, we are many, many stages down the line of the kind of legal redefinition of marriage. And we could spend probably a whole second hour like discussing each one and how many of them, if any, were justified. I mean, it kind of begins with no fault divorce, which in some ways is what this piece is about. There's Obergefell, gay marriage, right? There's a bunch of stuff kind of like peripheral to that. The pill, for instance, is another thing that is, I think, kind of related.
Feminism's conquest, both in quantity and qualitatively in curriculum of the modern university and more people
Yeah,
attending. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, that little grace note, Ryan, that you point out. I mean, first of all, I think it's such an astute point about the grass always being greener, right? Because whatever else marriage is, it is a rejection of that way of life, right? It is an affirmative assertion that if you really truly want to achieve fulfillment, the right thing is to bind yourself, to make rules that are unbreakable and to commit, right? And no fault divorce, of course, opens up the possibility that that's not what marriage is about. And then social media kind of arrays this glittering tray of imaginary other lives that you could be living. That grace note that you point out about like men are becoming more religious and there's going to be, I mean, I think we are due for a reckoning about this and about just what, if marriage isn't anything at all, but if it's also not the kind of cowled medieval fever dream that Emma Watson is invoking when she talks about pressure to get married, right? What is it, right? What do we want marriage to be? What are the rules of marriage going to be? And I think like that is going to be something that actually Gen Z and younger will be sort of responsible for hammering out with the guidance of their elders.
And these kids are they all need to just return to the Decalogue because and their therapists clearly aren't helping them because the two things that, among many other things, that will lead you to a healthy marriage will be to be a sentinel over the difficulties of grass is always greener, both on the erotic side and on the material side. So keep a lookout for and tamp down the occasions for you to experience grass
Yeah.
is always greener in the form of erotic, that is lust for something other than your partner, and the material, that is envy for all these lives that you could be living, except you're trapped in the one you're in. So
Do you mean to say "thou shalt not covet"?
that's right.
Perhaps are you
Right.
working your way for? So what a genius idea! Where'd you come up with that? Right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is kind of the. I wrote the other day about my guilty pleasure, which is the Showtime reality show Couples Therapy, in which exactly this problem occurs. There is no standard about what the right way of life is. And so these people like chase their tails forever trying to figure out why they're miserable. We should wrap this up. And I know, Ryan, you might have to go a little bit. So I'm going to ask you first for a cultural recommendation.
Yeah, I a little off the beaten path, but I wanted it caught my eye today, so I'm going to read from. It's a short post, but from Steve Saylor's Substack, which everyone who doesn't run screaming for the hills when they hear Steve Saylor's name should read. It's very
And if you
eclectic.
do run Screaming from the Hills, calm down. Get over
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. His Substack title is "Vibe Shift: Quantum Supremacy Guy Wins Physics Nobel." Subtitle is "Nobel Folks Don't Care About 2019 Cancel Culture Controversy," all spelled with K's. So this is the short post, and it's worth checking out, especially for those interested in the hard sciences, which I know you are, Spencer. An Englishman, a Frenchman, and an American, John Clark, Michel Devereux, John M. Martinez, respectively, have won this year's Nobel Prize in Physics for the discovery of macroscopic quantum mechanical tunneling and energy quantization in an electric circuit. For those who are wondering, what is that? Go to just Google Nobel Physics Prize 2025. They've got a nice press release and some sort of dumbed down articles to explain this interesting proof of quantum mechanics, which has transformed our world at the microchip level and will continue to do so, I think, at an accelerating pace. As usual these days, they are pretty old, born between 1942 and 1958, and are being awarded for work done in the mid 1980s. And they are pale and male as well as stale, typical
Mhm.
sailor. The Nobel Prizes are so prestigious that the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences pretty much ignored the DEI era in choosing the winners of the three hard science Nobels. The American quantum computing wizard Martinez was subjected to one of the funnier cancel culture controversies when he and his team published an article in 2019 about quantum supremacy, a term coined in 2011 by Caltech professor John Preskill to mean when a quantum computer can do something that just can't be done by a classical computer. A letter to the editor in Nature then denounced the term quantum supremacy as terrifying physicists of color by reminding them of white supremacy. This is the letter. "We take issue with the use of supremacy when referring to quantum computers that can outcalculate even the fastest supercomputers. We consider it irresponsible to override the historical context of this descriptor, which risks sustaining divisions in race, gender, and class. We call for the community to use quantum advantage instead." Pres- this is the final paragraph. Preskill responded that he'd rejected quantum advantage precisely because it misses the point. Quantum supremacy doesn't represent an advantage in quantity, but a difference in quality. When a quantum computer can do something traditional computers simply can't. Also, quantum supremacy sounds cooler than quantum advantage. Go check out this Nobel Prizes are getting handed out right now. We mentioned the Peace Prize, which Trump covets. So it's worth checking out the hard sciences, especially for those of you inclined to, learn something new.
I like the idea of a focus group to brainstorm alternatives to quantum supremacy, quantum appeal, quantum attractiveness. Yeah, that's awesome, Ryan, and I will definitely read that because it scratches several of my intellectual itches. Just to say that not only has quantum revolutionized our microchips and other technology, it also has that advantage over some of the more trendy new physics, such as string theory, for which Stephen Hawking was famous. These are fascinating ideas that people speculate about. Multiverse is another example, which intersects with quantum, but extends out into this vast array of kind of speculation. And one thing I love about the idea of quantum supremacy is that quantum continually flummoxes and infuriates the partisans of other disciplines by actually doing things like making stuff, technology possible, which used to be kind of the measure of the success of a scientific theory before it got kind of hyper theoretical. So this is generally just awesome. Mike, what do you got?
Yeah, so I got Welbeck. So he's the great French novelist. His last novel, Annihilation, I think was published in French first in 2022. Was then translated by Sean Whiteside, and so I got that for last Christmas. So I finally got to it this year and finally finished it, and it is far bigger than his usual, especially Submission, Elementary Particles, which I would actually highly recommend if you haven't read either of those to read them. And yeah, this one was very different, much bigger. I thought much more character development, many different kind of plot lines going on at the same time. It really kind of centers on Paul, who is a guy who works for the French finance minister. So he is in government. It links obviously to the politics of France going on pretty much honestly at the moment. So it happens in the future, I think is in 2027, but then it goes into the dysfunction in his family. And then the book kind of shifts actually toward the end. And I'm not going to wreck it by saying what exactly happens there, but it's fascinating. It's definitely a different novel than he's written before. I thought Serotonin, the novel that came out just previously, was kind of a little bit going to the well a little bit too much. But this one I thought was absolutely worth reading, very interesting. It may not have some of his famous kind of paragraphs that really kind of hit you through the nuance as much. It's almost like he's kind of starting to try to see through the nihilism and see that there's maybe something there, which is I think a good and an important move for him. So we'll see if this is his last novel. I hope it's not. I hope he keeps writing. I think he's only in his late 60s, but I would definitely recommend reading Annihilation.
Oh, that's a great rec. Thank you. I have known about that novel, but resisted reading another Welbeck despite my
Mm-hmm.
great admiration for him. So now I will. I know that I promised only dumb and lowbrow recommendations from now on, but I have to call an audible because our conversation today just really made me feel that there is one and only one Greek play that everybody must be reading. I've felt this way, had occasion to feel this way before, but whenever we're talking about generational differences and radicalism among the youth and education, especially higher education, I just feel that I must pound the table and thwack upon the surface of said table a copy of Aristophanes' The Clouds. This is his play about Socrates, which Socrates says in the Apology helped get him killed. There's a long, obviously, scholarly debate that we don't need to get into here about whether that's true and what Aristophanes meant by putting Socrates in kind of the villain role of this play. But that's to me somewhat less interesting than the way Aristophanes dramatizes, hilariously, as usual, the motivations that fathers might have for sending their sons to learn crazy, radical, newfangled type edumacation. The father in this play first tries to go to Socrates himself to learn how to get out of his debts by arguing for the weaker argument and basically indulging in rhetorical chicanery. His brain turns out to be too crusty and not neuroplastic enough to deal with some of these crazy concepts. So he sends his son instead, and he gets much more than he bargained for when his son learns that, in fact, filial piety is also an op and hijinks and violence ensue. It's a profound play as well as a funny play about many of the things that we were just talking about today. Aaron Puchigian, the poet, put out a compilation of 4 translations of 4 Aristophanes plays not too long ago, and this one is in it. So if you don't read Greek, or if you read Greek but Aristophanes is a step too far with all the slang and the fart jokes, go check out his translation of The Clouds. Okay, that's it from us this week. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to know more about all the things we do, you should go to our website at americanmind.org, where we publish daily pieces of interest to you, dear listener. We also have a sister publication, the Claremont Review of Books, at claremontreviewofbooks.com. There's a great piece up there right now on the front page, in front of the paywall, called Goodbye to the Good War, which is about World War I and II, especially World War II, revisionism by Sean McMeekin. I think it's worth your engagement, even if, like me, you don't agree with absolutely everything in it. Then you can go to claremont.org/donate once you are so impressed with all the material that we put out that you feel you absolutely must send us a gift. We are greatly appreciative of that, for donations large and small. And one more time, that's claremont.org/donate. If you would like to go to our gala on November 6th, the 25th anniversary of CRB is happening, and you can go to goldenageagenda.com to find tickets to that. Check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. And the last thing on your ever-growing homework list is to rate, review, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Let people know about the Roundtable. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, the brothers G, Jake, and Ryan Gannon. And thanks to you all one more time for listening. We will talk to you next week.